One Piece characters need to finally start dying because deaths have been so incredibly rare in the story, but they really shouldn't be. And I think that Oda has realized that in the final saga, it's absolutely inevitable to have some truly shocking and impactful deaths of major characters that will shape the entire ending of One Piece. And so to satisfy my own thirst for blood, today I want to talk about 7 major deaths in particular that I think have been foreshadowed heavily by Oda, including 2 Straw Hats that would truly break the story. But before we can get to the Straw Hat, let's first talk about your favorite Yonko's favorite Yonko, Red Hair Shanks. If there's one person on this list that I would bet actual money on dying, it's gonna be Shanks. His entire character arc from the moment that we first met him has been filled with the theme of self-sacrifice on behalf of the new generation. Time and time again, he has put his own body on the line for them. Don't believe me? Well, let's look at the facts. In chapter 1, Shanks leaps into the ocean and sacrifices his own arm in order to save Luffy from the Lord of the Coast. He then gives him his straw hat and pushes Luffy to become a great pirate. Next, in chapter 579, he shows up out of nowhere to save both Kobe and Luffy from Akainu's wrath by stepping in front of his attack. And he then goes on to challenge the world government to fight him and his crew if they have a problem with that. And then in chapter 1055, he activates what I can only describe as a Wi-Fi hockey drone strike to force Admiral Green Bull out of Wano, saving both Yamato and Momonosuke. But it's not just the new era. Ever since chapter 1, we've seen just how intense Shanks gets when his friends and people he cares about are in danger. He crushes the Mountain Bandit for harassing Luffy, and in chapter 1079, in what is clearly the coolest Shanks moment of the series so far, he just deletes Eustace Kid for attacking his fleet in Elbaf. In a nutshell, Shanks is simply the kind of man who's being set up to sacrifice himself in order to save Luffy. He saved him at the start of the journey, he saved him at the halfway point in Marineford, and he's pretty much guaranteed, I think, to do it one last time during the final war as well. We all know that he has some sort of grand major plan set out for Luffy and has done everything that he can to push him to become the Warrior of Liberation, aka Joy Boy. Now, whether or not Luffy was originally supposed to get that devil fruit is an entirely different question, because I still stand by the idea that originally Ace was supposed to eat the Gum Gum fruit, but it doesn't really matter. Ever since Luffy was the one who ate the devil fruit, he has been on a series-long journey to reunite and prove himself to Shanks. And I like to think that narratively, the most fulfilling plot device would be Shanks seeing Luffy become the next Joy Boy and putting his life on the line to save him from the next character that's gonna be in our list, the man that he told us gave him his iconic scar in chapter 434, and the man it seems like he was talking to the Gorosei about in chapter 907. Because Marshall D. Teach, the dreaded man Blackbeard himself, is number 6 on our list. And well, when you're one of the primary villains of the entire series, I'm nearly certain that you just have to die, right? I mean, he has been set up as Luffy's narrative foil for the entire series so far, ever since he was first introduced in chapter 146. Also, a quick free English lesson for all of you: a narrative foil is the term used by someone designed to contrast another character. Now, this is typically a character who contrasts with the protagonist in order to emphasize certain traits that the main character has. Some perfect examples in anime and manga are Goku and Vegeta, or Midoriya and Shigaraki, and in terms of One Piece, well, the greatest foil of them all is simply Blackbeard. From the moment that we see him react completely opposite to the taste of that cherry pie, I have known that Blackbeard was fated to die. Well, that might be a little bit extreme, since it's kind of hard to imagine at that point that Luffy will kill anybody, but you kind of get the idea. But actually, I think that that's actually worth discussing. Now, personally, I kind of still cannot imagine that Luffy's going to intentionally kill Blackbeard. He really doesn't murder people at all, unless you count Kaido, who I would argue was not murdered on purpose, you know, if he is even dead to begin with. Now, Luffy is the kind of guy who crushes people's dreams and wills instead of executing them. This was actually officially confirmed by Oda in SBS 14 during a question corner segment as well. Bandits, Arlong, and Doflamingo, these are all villains who Luffy has stepped up to and then crushed, shattering their dreams. Or in the case of someone like Kaido, who dreams of defeat, well, he helps them out with a fist, that is. Now, Luffy is a conqueror after all. It's his job to conquer his enemies, not necessarily kill them. As we'll see, there's actually a handful of conquerors on this list that might kick the bucket, including the Straw Hat Captain himself, but we'll talk all about them in a few minutes. For now, I want to focus on how Oda has been hinting at Blackbeard's death for literal decades. This core dynamic actually has evidence predating even the series, and it's rooted in the original pre-One Piece series called Roman's Dawn, the beta test version of One Piece, which has characters like Luffy and Shanks talking about two distinct types of pirates. Peace mains, the good pirates who save and help people like the Red Hair Pirates or the Straw Hat Crew, and on the opposite end you have the evil pirates who plunder and murder like the Morganeers. Here we're talking about pirates like Crocodile, Doflamingo, and of course Blackbeard would fit this mold perfectly as well. Now, even though interestingly these terms are never actually used in the official main series, the concept very clearly manifests in the series nonetheless. Oda has actually hinted at this fated rivalry from way before the series actually first came out. So the real question is, who is actually gonna kill Blackbeard then if it's not Luffy? And looking at the evidence, I think there are actually two pretty likely options. And I want to start by talking about the first one, which is the Marines. Teach is a former warlord, an infamous pirate, and a man who time and time again has caused a ton of problems for the entire world government. He has kidnapped both Kobe and Garp. He has the former Admiral Kuzan working for him, tainting the Marines' good name, and actively is spreading the will of the worst pirate in history, Roxy Zebek. He does that by literally naming his ship the Saber of Zebek and claiming his former territory as his own. To put it mildly, the world government has every reason whatsoever to just straight up murder this man. Plus, if we're going off of his inspiration, this would be the correct answer. I mean, the real pirate Blackbeard was hunted and killed by a British naval lieutenant named Robert Maynard. In fact, he was shot at least 5 times and then stabbed over 20 times, which seems like a little bit of overkill, but I guess people were holding a bit of a grudge, and eventually having his head hung on the mast of their navy ship as well. So you could say, yeah, they made sure that he was dead, as I guess the way I would put it. Now, this aspect of his real life story is what probably inspired the cruel death of Whitebeard at the hands of Blackbeard, and I think it's setting up yet another perfect twist of fate by Oda if Blackbeard dies the very same way. But this time, instead of standing strong and proud, he would crumble to his knees like the weak-willed, spineless coward that he is. Or I guess at least 1/3 of him is. Speaking of which, I actually think that the much more likely idea here is that once Luffy crushes his will and his dreams, proving to the world that he's nothing but a joke, his crew will actually be the ones who end up turning on him. And after looking into this more, this idea might actually be hinted at in chapter 1081, when Blackbeard tells Aokiji that the only thing pirates need is an alignment of interest in order to become a crew. And well, I think once Teach cannot enable the interests of people like Pizarro, Lafitte, or Katarina Devon, he might just be dead in the water, stabbed in the back. Okay, now we've already talked about 2 of the fiercest pirates in the series dying, and while we definitely have more pirates to talk about, there's also some marine characters that are set up to kick the bucket as well. And the first of which I was literally just talking about, the former Admiral Aokiji and the now Titanic Captain Kuzan, because you are number 5 on my death list. Here's the deal. Kuzan, this ice cold fella, he has seen some stuff. The genocide of an entire island, and thousands die in the Battle of Marineford. And you know what? Most of it hasn't really been sitting well with him. For one, early on in his career, he defied direct orders from the Gorosei and saved the lives of Nico Robin and Jaguar D. Saul. And despite doing the right thing, we do know that he's still been consumed by guilt for what happened in Ohara. He had been watching over Robin for years and only finally stopped when Robin told him that she had finally found a real home and family with the Straw Hat Pirates. And just recently we found out that yet again he couldn't kill a former ally, because in chapter 1126 it was confirmed officially that he didn't, or in his words, couldn't kill Vice Admiral Garp, his mentor. Conveniently enough, he ended up doing the exact same thing to Saul. Now, whether or not that was more guilt or he's secretly still a Marine working for Sword doesn't really matter to me. This man does not kill good people, and that's something that I think is going to get him killed out instead. When he betrays Blackbeard, and yes, I'm saying when, not if, that man is absolutely going to murder him. And if he should actually end up being a real pirate, I mean, Admiral Green Bull or Akainu aren't going to let him make it out of the final saga alive, that is for sure. But most importantly though, he has the chance to complete his own character arc once and for all, making up for all of the mistakes in his past, which again, I think he's being a bit harsh there on himself, but it would be quite nice. Kuzan could go out saving 1, 2, or potentially even 3 characters. Nico Robin is the most obvious one here, as he could give his own life to let her live a peaceful and happy one in the new era. But then again, he has also shown hints of care and strong respect towards Luffy and Kobe, most likely connected to his relationship to Garp. In fact, I could absolutely see Kuzan putting his life on the line to secure Kobe's future as a Marine Admiral, much like Garp did for him on Hachinosu as well. Or if he is fully a pirate, he could do the same thing for Luffy, hedging his bets on the Warrior of Liberation, fixing the broken system that he used to be a part of. Because once again, he did also let Luffy live after he froze him solid as well, something that he only does for his homies. And yes, he can tell everyone that it's because he owed his grandpa, but honestly, I think we all know that he's just a big softie inside of that ice-cold exterior. Also, despite it being non-canon, this idea was actually already teased in Film Z, where Kuzan actually helps Luffy and the Straw Hats find the main villain, a former Marine Admiral gone rogue. Talk about foreshadowing there. And I can already see it now, you know, Blackbeard capturing Robin, holding her up, and is ready to cut her down on Laugh Tale when suddenly an ice spike pierces through his chest. Kind of how Squirt did it with Whitebeard, I guess. How poetic. Kuzan lunges in to save her, taking a fatal blow as he pushes her away from Blackbeard. A beautiful sacrifice that comes full circle with his character arc as he tells her to keep on living. You know, even though I think that this would be a very heartwarming and insanely hype moment, Kuzan isn't the only world government member destined to sacrifice himself, I think. There's another Marine that we have to talk about today, his mentor, the hero of the Marines, Monkey D. Garp. He is also someone with incredible ties to the #1 spot on our list, but for now I want to talk about how he is absolutely gonna die. You see, I, amongst many others I think, was mildly disappointed when Garp didn't end up sacrificing himself for Kobe on Hachinosu. Now, to be fair, he tried to, absolutely, but since it was against Kuzan, I think the vast majority of people realized that he probably wouldn't die. That was kind of the whole point of my last segment, right? So, don't worry, because we're in luck. The confirmation of him being alive just means that he is bound to meet his maker later in the final war. No. Some of you might already be saying, Manu, why do you think that he's gonna die? And probably more importantly, why do you want him to die so badly? Which, that, my dear viewer, is a pretty great question. It all has to do with one fateful chapter. It is chapter 574, Portgas the Ace dies. Boom! Donuts! We see the tragic ripple effect of Akainu killing Ace and see how it completely dismantles a bunch of characters. The Whitebeard Pirates, Luffy, and most importantly for my point here, Monkey D. Garp. Garp is beyond enraged, nearly crushing Akainu with what I just assume was about to be the nastiest galaxy impact we've seen so far. And we then see how Garp is physically struggling to cope with letting Ace die in chapter 590, and it's especially highlighted when Dadan drills into him for Ace's death as well. It is a soul-crushing moment, to say the least, that truly makes you feel awful for Garp, who failed to keep his big promise to Roger, but more importantly, failed to protect the grandchild that he raised himself. And I think that this regret clearly drove him to focus on and care about Kobe a lot more, going so far as to risk his own life to free him from Hachinosu. And this all is pointing towards a third and possible final big moment where he finally gets over himself and ends up saving his pirate grandson, because we have seen that his care for Luffy is higher than the concern he has for the Marines, as he has let Luffy escape countless times and even flopped at Marineford, letting Luffy go and save Ace. And so with all of the news about Imu, the Gorosei, and the ancient weapons being now revealed by Vegapunk, Garp can finally warrant putting his family first. What he should have done all along, whether it's stopping Blackbeard from crushing Luffy or pulling a King Cobra of Alabasta by jumping in front of Imu's darkness arrow, I am 90% confident that Garp the hero is in the end finally gonna fall and ironically become an even bigger hero for all of us. But now with 3 characters left on this list, we still have to get to the absolutely story-breaking Straw Hat deaths, but before we figure out which crew members I personally think could be at death's door right now, I need to talk about the supreme ruler of the entire world, Luffy's final enemy, Imu. Because coming in at number 3, I think it's pretty clear that Imu just has to die. There is no way, shape, or form that anyone in their right mind should just forgive and forget what this villain has done. And while yes, Luffy is not in his right mind, the dude is weird as hell, even such a goofy and weird dude like Mugiwara no Luffy can absolutely lock in when the time actually comes. And Imu, your time definitely is coming. I mean, just like Doflamingo, Charlos, Arlong, or Enel, like the many godlike characters before you, we have seen what happens when you step to Luffy's friends and family, because Luffy is gonna step on you, or punch you, or maybe step on you. I mean, the point is, Luffy doesn't forgive truly vile acts of evil, and vile acts are pretty much the only thing that Imu has done so far in the entire story. Like ordering a Buster Call on Ohara, ruining Nico Robin's life, or killing his crewmate Vivi Stat. Oh, and I guess there's also the part where you wiped out a small nation off the map while you tried to kill Sabo, his brother, as well. Come on, I mean, we saw the lengths that Luffy went to in Marineford in order to save Ace, so just imagine what he's gonna do when he finds out that Imu is after Sabo and Vivi. It does kind of sound like there might be a Barangang with your name written all over it, Imu. But in all actuality, the most important reason why Imu will die is because they aren't subscribed to the Ohara Patreon. I mean, with premium art assets, extra bonus content, and early chapter reviews, Imu would have had every resource necessary to stay immortal and defeat Luffy. So don't make the same mistake that they did and go do that. And well, the big reason is that Imu needs to die so that Luffy can actually bring the new dawn to the world. Luffy needs to complete Joy Boy's and maybe even Nika's quest. After all, Imu has been now set up as his #1 opposition for completing the goal of the entire series. Now, Luffy himself might not actually care all that much about it, but the world actually needs Luffy to kill Imu. I'm sure you think that your actions are justified and brave, but I disagree. Unlike our #2 entry on this list, the soon-to-be brave warrior of the sea, God Usopp, and boy, are we going into controversial territory now. Okay, hear me out. I can think of no other way for a man like Usopp to go out. I mean, we learned all the way back in chapter 100 that Usopp's big dream is to become a brave warrior of the sea, and over the years we've seen him really grow into the mold, and in the process he has befriended a bunch of giants as well. Some of you might already know where I'm going with this because this has become somewhat of a popular theory. I truly believe and have for years that Usopp could and probably should actually die as a massive sacrifice for the crew against Imu. If he sacrifices his own life, he would absolutely go down in history as the bravest warrior of the sea and have the chance to fulfill all of his lies. These moments of prophecy that he accidentally weaves into existence have so many chances to happen if he becomes the leader of a massive army. Maybe say a fleet of 8,000 giant warrior pirates that are all led to their glorious deaths by Usopp. Because remember, that was the lie that he told at the beginning of the entire series. Now, we do know that the Giants of Elbaf are very heavily based on Vikings and Norse mythology, and with that being the case, they absolutely are all going to want to go to Valhalla. In case you don't know, Valhalla is essentially Nordic warrior heaven, where only the bravest and strongest soldiers who die a glorious death in battle can actually go. And with this in mind, I believe that the best way for Usopp to truly prove that he's a brave warrior of the sea is to make it to that Viking heaven. Maybe Brook can go visit him and confirm it with his soul fruit powers, because that would be kind of nice. And while I totally agree that Oda actually killing a Straw Hat is not super high in terms of probability on my list, I do kind of think that he really needs to let this dude's story come full circle. Let him become the hero middle of the greatest tale told for ages. He would genuinely end up becoming God Usopp, the legendary version of himself that exists in the stories he actually used to tell Kaya about. I mean, imagine Brook or Nami going back to the village and getting to sit down and tell Kaya all about his adventures. It would just be the most somber and beautiful and heart-wrenching way to wrap up this arc. So you better do it, Oda, as much as it's gonna hurt and as much as I'm gonna cry about it. And while we're at it and talking about controversial deaths, you better also let Luffy die, Oda. Because that's right, the #1 spot on this list of people who need to die in One Piece belongs to none other, I think, than the sun god and main character himself, Monkey D. Luffy. Oh no, oh, I can't. Don't throw stones at me, please. Okay, please, let me lay it down for you. By the end of the series, Luffy will have fulfilled his dreams. I hope we can all agree. Becoming the Pirate King, and then whatever secret dream he actually shares with Roger that Oda still won't tell us about. But more importantly, for so many chapters now, Oda has made it very clear that Luffy has been burning the candle of his lifespan at both ends of the stick with all of his broken powers. Gear 2 burns through his lifespan. Ivankov's hormone boost came with a very specific reduction to his lifespan as well, and Gear 5 first activated while he was on death's door and constantly puts him into that old shriveled man form, which looks like he's on the verge of dying of old age. All of these things, and the fact that Luffy's greatest parallel in the story is none other than Roger, a man who also mysteriously died of a disease shortly after reaching Laugh Tale at a young age, is pointing towards Luffy's inevitable death. However, and yes, I know what that sounds like, I think that's actually a good thing to happen. Because I think that once he saves the world, there just won't be anything left to do for him. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, he will have achieved everything and he can properly be the warrior of liberation that brought the new dawn. It's just that this dawn is gonna be far more similar to how Roger kicked off the next pirate era. Maybe Kobe will be the one to execute him, though that would be brutal, or the world will simply celebrate the glorious death of the new sun. Now, I hear you. Manu, we have Chopper who wants to heal all diseases, and we have Law who can just give him the immortality surgery to keep him alive. And while yes, on paper, obviously, if we wanted to keep Luffy alive, Oda could absolutely do that. Let's look a little bit at the trends here. 1, do you really think that Law would sacrifice himself for Luffy? I think probably not. I mean, he'd most likely just take a few more risks, but his loyalty isn't the same as an actual crew member. And number 2, do you even think that Luffy would ever let someone else die for him? Not in a million years. If anyone were to actually sacrifice their life for Luffy, he would absolutely lose it. Which I'm painfully aware is ironic because of all the points I've made in this video about potential sacrifices, but that's for people with true, deep emotional ties to Luffy. People that even he would have to acknowledge are making the right play or would become the perfect martyr to push Luffy past the finish line in order to defeat Imu. And also, let's be real, from the very first chapter, Oda has been writing Luffy not so much as a person, but as an ideal version of being brave and being kind and helping others. Luffy is literally a god. He's too perfect almost as a person, and I think, I don't know, I just don't see a way where Luffy becomes Pirate King and then settles down and chills for the rest of his life or starts a farm. I think he is this ideal version, this like One Piece Jesus character that just will sacrifice himself for the rest. But speaking of defeating Imu, Gear 5 may be powerful for him, but it just comes with so many drawbacks as we just talked about and isn't even strong enough to actually defeat a single Gorosei right now. Like, how is he going to defeat Imu and bring the new dawn if he can't even body a few old men, am I right? Luffy absolutely still needs another major power-up, a final form to truly embody the sun god and live up to the title of Warrior of Liberation. What I'm saying is that Luffy absolutely still needs a Gear 6, and you can find out all about it in this video right here below me. Maybe he becomes a literal sun, or is he actually a fallen angel with Lunarian powers? I guess you'll have to find out what my thoughts are by clicking below. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.